Hello and welcome everybody to the Index Committee, which is the Incarceration Prevention Reduction Task Force Information Needs and Data Exchange Committee. Before we begin, I want to start with the land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried and by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. All right, everybody. We've got a relatively short listing on our agenda today, but there are a few sort of lengthy items, so I want to get started right away. I know that there are people who are potentially going to be coming in a few minutes late, and that's okay. So the first item on our agenda is to kind of go over a discussion of where we've been, sort of to recap quickly where we've been, where we think we're at currently, and then look into the future and where we think we're headed. The reason why this is important is because we've had sort of almost fits and starts that got pretty well derailed when COVID hit us all. So I just want to kind of go over some of our successes quickly and then talk about some of the things that we need to work on and again, where we're headed in the future. So to begin with, we started talking about all of the potential data points that might exist in our criminal justice system and started kind of gathering what we thought to be data points and where that information may be available. And we pretty quickly realized that some of our partners in Public Defender's Office and some of the municipalities needed access to information that corrections was storing in Spillman. And so we developed a small work group that got together and essentially honed in on exactly what the needs of those partners were and delivered some reports, some queries, some information that is automatically generated. And that happened in multiple stages. And then we also had a website development where we made a lot of information that wasn't previously available to the public. And so there was some pretty great success with those two endeavors. As I mentioned before, we experienced pretty high COVID impacts, not just with this group, but because a lot of the people who are dealing with their own roles in their own prospective agencies have been dealing with COVID issues in and of themselves. So we didn't get a lot done, I don't believe, in the last year, but we did come up with some statistical information that is being made available sort of on a weekly, monthly, and annual basis for the various stakeholders to understand a little bit more about what's going on in, especially the corrections environment for our partners. So that brings us kind of to today. What I see us looking at right now is kind of figuring out what things are going to look like post COVID landscape with, some of our efforts, some of our undertakings to gather some of this criminal justice data. And I think we really are being intentional about the understanding that we all have about how our systems exist, how they relate to one another, and how they categorize and store information. We would be remiss if we didn't at least recognize that a number of our partners still work with paper information, and it's necessarily challenging to get all of that information. So we've talked at this group level, we've talked at the task force level about, sort of issues that are taking place where we're being asked to gather information, but we don't have the infrastructure that is in place for that. And we really don't have any staff that's dedicated to do that in a meaningful way as well. So where we're headed, I met with a representative from a company called Recidiviz yesterday. I just reached out to them and said, hey, you know, we're going through this process of trying to identify criminal justice data and trying to figure out if there are ways that we can help inform decision makers and policymakers in our area with information based on how relevant, how effective, and how timely the different things that we might want to do or change about our criminal justice system work. Unfortunately, they are currently working with larger systems, so like at the state level, and they do not have a partnership with Washington State at this point. So it didn't seem like there was a direct path of travel to have them kind of help us in this process. But it sounded, at least on the surface, as though the information gathering that they do is pretty robust and would help, but it doesn't necessarily fit with our needs and or expectations in the coming months and years. So we are currently being asked, so the index committee itself is being asked to generate data and be responsive to some requests for information that is coming through. I'm going to get this wrong if I don't read it. The needs assessment. So many of you are aware there's a movement at the task force level to try and gather information for needs for criminal justice campus. And so the idea being that we have information that is critical to understanding, you know, what might need to be involved in a future campus were there one to be constructed. So understanding kind of the limitations of our infrastructure, as I pointed out, I see us potentially getting a fair amount of mileage out of making some smaller work groups and focusing on some specific questions that we can, you know, really dive into the information that we have at our hand, you know, at our fingertips, so to speak. And I've already skipped over it, but I didn't want to. So I'm going to ask Perry to present a little bit about some of the systems, you know, kind of the where we're at picture right now and kind of where we're headed picture right now, include some of the data systems that exist in our overall criminal justice network. And Perry has some material to present on that.
Thanks, Caleb. And I think Jill's going to put a little screen share up momentarily. So what I looked back, and about a year ago when we had an index meeting, I had kind of put this together and thought it would be good to quickly go over this as far as where we're at with some of the major systems within Whatcom County government, system updates. So the first one, our Superior Court Case Management System, had its first upgrade in many years, and that went well, and completed that in early 2021. I believe Dave Reynolds is on the Zoom meeting right now, and I think he has a little bit more of an e-filing update than I was able to provide here on this quick summary.
Sure, thanks, Perry.
Dave has a moment.
We've been lined up to begin Odyssey e-filing for the last couple of years. Snohomish County was the pilot project. They've launched. However, we found out last month because AOC is now in a contract with Tyler Technologies for the district court and court of lower jurisdiction projects. They were going to start the e-filing off there, and they got a large amount of pushback from lower courts of lower jurisdiction because they didn't have a program in place to accept the filings. So at this stage, they've now put e-filing on hold indefinitely for Superior Court, which seems a little backwards to me, but that's where we're at with that.
Thanks, Dave. I know there's a lot of interest, especially from the prosecutor, public defender, and others on that topic.
And Perry, at this stage, I'm thinking of looking at a third-party vendor for that thing. I've dealt with AOC long enough to know how much stuff gets delayed, and they've got a lot of projects going on at once, and we're not necessarily in a position to continue to just wait.
Okay, and then the next one really is also another Superior Court project, which is well, Dave, you might as well just present that one. How's that?
Okay, this is another AOC project we've been involved with for several years. We have a right track system we've been using for since 2004, which is limping along, and thanks to IT, still operable, but it's not a long-term solution. So anyway, we found out a couple of years ago that AOC has a Tyler Technology, which does Odyssey, has a case management component, which would actually work fairly well for juvenile court to replace that. However, it only worked for offender cases, and we have the need for dependency and other civil cases within there too. So we have worked with them on doing some reprogramming and restructuring of that so we can use it for all of our case types. We were told we were told December we'd going live in January. We were told in January that it's now kicked over till February because they're still waiting for a delivery from Tyler. So another situation where we're being delayed, and it's definitely impacting us, but there's not much choice at this stage.
Thank you. And then we have District Court Case Management System, and Dave referred to that. Of course, the AOC has selected Tyler Odyssey for the courts of limited jurisdiction. And last year, when we kind of went over this list, Bruce from District Court reported that they were moving forward with e-filing. So Dave just kind of gave an update on that. E-filing has been put on hold across the board. And so what County IT is working with right now, District Court, we started up a project to have them start scanning some of their documents such that when they get to their implementation with AOC that's scheduled for 2024, the data integration will be a little smoother. I don't know if Bruce is on the meeting or not, but we'll keep progressing down the list.
It doesn't look like he is, Perry.
All right. And then one of the biggest changes, and Maya's on the meeting from the Public Defender's Office, is we've got our contract in place for a new case management system for the public defender, and we've got a project kickoff scheduled for April 1st. And I don't know if Maya wants to add anything to that update, other than a smile.
It's going to be an incredible amount of work, and it'll be fascinating to switch from paper files to a fully electronic system. I'm sure we'll face a fair amount of resistance with that. And, well, anyway, we're excited, and thanks to Perry and the whole IT team.
And then in parallel, we're working with the prosecutor's office on their case management system. And we have an RFP that is basically with our finance right now, and we hope that it will be published middle of this month, and we're anxious to get started on that. And ideally, we'd have both of our attorney offices with new case management systems before the end of the year. And then a little bit on some successes from last year. It's been years and years and years, but we do finally have an electronic medical record system in our jail medical group. And Caleb did a great job, and so did others from IT and corrections, and Brianna, the nursing supervisor. So that's now in place. And of course, the data needs to accumulate for a while before we can get good reports out of it electronically. But that's a real win, I think, for everybody. And then our sheriff's office body-worn camera project in contract at the end of 2020, and substantially deployed to patrol this past November. So that's kind of a lot of other things are going on, but that's a kind of a broad update on some of our larger systems in our criminal justice system. Thanks, Caleb.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Perry, for that helpful explanation. Again, we keep going back to the information that we need isn't necessarily ready to hand. We've got kind of some issues with, getting information from a paper source. We've got issues with getting information to like the AOC or from the AOC. And I understand that there may be, potentially some inroads that we can make with AOC as it exists right now without the Tyler Technologies involvement. But the 2024 timeline for Tyler Technologies integration for AOC for the courts of limited jurisdiction is just not fast enough for what we're hoping to accomplish in the near term with the index committee, at least as far as I'm concerned. I think probably that would be echoed by everybody else here. So what we're attempting to do at this exact moment, and what I'm proposing that we consider, is that we narrow down our focus to sort of 5 or 6 things that are most commonly asked questions of index to better inform the the stakeholder, is it stakeholder action committee? I can't remember the name of the acronym. The SAC?
Stakeholder Advisory Committee.
That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. Stakeholder Advisory Committee and the Technical Advisory Committee as it pertains to this assessment moving forward. So doing a little bit of brainstorming, some of the questions that came to the top are really things that we're going to try and answer from, and again, it's probably going to involve a work group or 2 or 3, but really is focusing in on what our law enforcement agencies are being called to, what kinds of calls of service exist out there, and to find out whether what that's driving at is, are people being diverted at initial contact, or they ultimately ending up incarcerated? And if we can, to the degree that it's possible, find out, what the flow of events is for our contacts with law enforcement. We think that the work of the task force has been effective in coming up with diversionary strategies over the years, and partnering with different agencies within the system, we think has been effective, but it's difficult to say how effective if we don't have a good grasp on that data. So I envision a particular work group focusing narrowly on the number of calls for service in our various law enforcement agencies, and for what reason were they called, and potentially what that outcome was for that initial contact. The second thing is sort of a natural progression of that from initial contact, trying to determine in our agencies how many warrants exist and for what reasons. And again, all trying to drive at, if we have a diversion that happens at initial contact, is it resulting in a positive outcome for that individual, or is it resulting in a warrant? If that's the case, what's the reason, if we can deduce any of that information out? And so trying to find granular data that pertains to the warrants, I think, might be an effective strategy to figure out the effectiveness of these individual diversion programs. And then we're going to continue to, but also expand the statistics based on the incarcerated individuals. So people who are in custody, either snapshot information or information that's accumulated over a larger period of time that show things like who's in custody, why they're in custody, average daily populations, alternatives, how they're functioning, if they're functioning, and pretrial supervision. if that's functioning as designed, or if there needs to be some adjustment to that. So I know that's a quick brush stroke to talk about something that's pretty important, and that's what I'm seeing being requested from the Law and Justice Committee, from the task force, and also I think that it's going to be informative information moving forward for the task force as a whole. At one point, Barry Buchanan, who's not here today, but he had requested some work on a statistical analysis of young adults in custody, specifically young adults who are 18 to 24 years of age, as a target group for reform and to lower recidivism rates. They were a part, I say Barry, but Barry was a part of a larger group that was doing some research and study on that particular group of individuals. And so we're hoping to get that a little bit further in an analysis. Dave, I see you've got a question.
Actually, a comment. There's a bill out 5122, which was introduced last year and is moving forward this year, which raises the age of juvenile jurisdiction to 18 and 19. So anybody 18 and 19 years old come on charged with an offense would come through juvenile court and not through superior or court to lower jurisdiction. So we're waiting to see what happens with that, but that bill has a bit of momentum.
What's the number again?
5122.
And that's not in effect yet, but that's something.
No, it's just being proposed. It also proposedly removes 13-year-olds from the jurisdiction of juvenile court. So it'd be 14 and above can be charged. Right now it's 12. It'd be about 12. So there's some pushback on it. If you get a fair number, especially in diversion, fair number of young people coming through that are diverted for some offenses. So the question is, what will happen with those youth? If nothing happens, do they go on to commit other offenses because of that, or what? So anyway, it's a bill that's got some momentum and some interest, definitely. So keep you posted.
Hey, thanks for that. And again, some of this information is going to be broken down by demographics. Some of it's going to be broken down by broken down by year or other quarterly information. So it'll be sort of ongoing capture of data, and then potentially some reports that focus in on snapshots or information that is viewed other than just in the aggregate form. And so that's kind of where I think those are the four broad brushstrokes, and we've got more potential that we could look into, but those are the things that keep coming up from the task force or from subcommittees of the task force in terms of what Index is asked to accomplish. Now, recognizing that, it's not an easy, hey, we're just going to wave a magic wand and all of this information is going to be available. It's going to take some heavy lifting potentially to go into detail on some of these particular asks, but that is the expectation that I think is of the Index committees, which we endeavor to answer some of these questions. And so to the degree that we're able to, I would like to say that we break into smaller work groups that are specific to each individual tasks, be it warrants, be it calls for service, and allow folks to have input on those. And I'm not sure if that's something that needs to have a motion. I'm not sure if that's something that needs to be discussed, but I'm open to suggestions or options about that. Yeah. Perry, go ahead.
We're certainly open to working with you and supporting these small groups, Caleb. So I think what's important is to figure out which ones we should start with and what parts of the criminal justice system we're going to need to work with. You mentioned warrants. That would be the courts, correct?
That would be my understanding of it. I know that a lot of individual jurisdictions maintain warrants, but they generally originate from a court, and my limited understanding of it, and I think we'll get a better perspective from the court's viewpoint rather than an individual agency who's more of a recipient of the warrant rather than the originator. Excellent. So Jill, do you know if I need to have any motions or if I want to propose that we do this work?
No, there doesn't need to be a motion.
Sweet. Tacit approval. Okay. Excellent. Let me see. So the next, that's pretty much it, unless anybody has any questions or comments about that agenda item, where we're at, where we've been, where we're headed. That's pretty much it, unless anybody has any questions on that agenda item. All right. Got all these professional meeting attenders who are like, all right, let's move on. Good stuff. So the last point, and it's a fairly short agenda, folks, is just a discussion about the available data. So the packet, page 1 through 8, has a whole bunch of course I've closed it, but it's got a whole bunch of matrices listed in, I can't even remember the date, it's been a long time, but we listed out what we thought we knew and where that information might exist. Let me pull the packet up again. Jill, maybe you could put that up on the screen for folks to look at. I have it open at least now. So going back to, and again, I'm totally not sure about the time frame, but it seems like it's been, a handful of years. We endeavored to figure out what individual pieces of information might exist and in which systems. And this was just really a wide net that we were trying to cast to figure out if we were to try and come up with some infrastructure, say, to a larger database. Because again, I think one of the underpinnings or one of the intended targets for Index is that Index exists as a database or a repository for information rather than just a group of people, or not, in addition to being a group of people. So if we were to have a repository, understanding where that data would come from and what that would look like is sort of foundational in that element. And so this, I think, in order for us to truly understand, kind of what is capable, this would have to be updated. There are additional points of access with the advent of the new systems, the new digitized systems, that potentially makes things more available. Obviously, it won't make it more available immediately because the prosecutor system isn't in place yet, but it does potentially allow for some information to be available in the near future. So I think that we should take another run at casting this net out and seeing if there are data points that could be updated. And I also would entertain finding out if there's agencies or systems that are not on this list. I would be interested to find out if we're not asking the right people as well. Anybody see any glaring issues? I see Amy's hand up.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I got a new microphone, so I wasn't sure. What I was thinking when you had said at the beginning, you wanted to know, like, all over the county, what kind of calls are, being called in, how the calls are being handled, and what the outcome is. Wouldn't the best information come from like Whatcom for that? Because they would have the whole county's data of every call that came in, what kind of calls they were, and how they ended up, if the person ended up going to jail or not.
I think that that is definitely a good place to start, Amy. One of the things that I think is, well, I think it's obvious, but it's not necessarily, so I apologize for that generalization, is that law enforcement is generally called to something, and it doesn't mean that that's what it necessarily stays. And I don't know that the nature of each call across jurisdictions is updated at the dispatch level. I'm not sure, I've been wrong before, but I think that that information resides in most law enforcement agencies. And it may be captured at the dispatch level, but I'm not sure that the nature is always kept up to date. Does that make any sense?
It does. I find on most cases on our calls that they do reflect what they actually are, but yeah, sometimes they need to be updated.
Okay. No, and again, I've been wrong before. It's only 2 o'clock. I'm ready and willing to admit that I don't always have the fresh information.
Yeah. Okay.
So no, definitely, I think that that's somewhere we could look and potentially add dispatch to that list. Chief, I see your hand up.
We also need to double check one thing. I'm not positive whether North County has changed over to Whatcom or whether they're still going through Border Patrol. Because I've been here too long and sometimes sequencing gets lost in my brain.
Yes. And I'm at the Blaine Police Department, and I know all Linden, Blaine, Summit, we're all on Whatcom now, everyone.
Excellent. That'll simplify things. That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it, Amy.
No problem.
Yeah, that is a good point, Chief, but I'm pretty sure all agencies now use Whatcom for dispatching service. So that is a good note that I will add right now to my list of notes to consider adding dispatch to this list, not just for the data capture, but for specifically focusing on calls for service, because it's potential that some of the calls for service start out as EMS calls and they may not even need law enforcement, but they might be in a category that we would want to pay attention to, or they would come out sometimes as calls for law enforcement assistance and ultimately be referred to EMS and vice versa. So you've absolutely hit the nail on the head, Amy. So I appreciate that feedback. Anybody else do we see that is missing from this list in terms of the broad net that we can cast out here for data points? I'm thinking EMS is another one on here, and certainly the work that Jeremy Morton is doing may be able to inform some of this from a gelada perspective. So am I wrong about that, or?
I think it should be added to the list.
Yeah. Okay.
We could probably add health secure to the list as well.
Okay. And one other that I don't see up here is potentially the health department. And it's potential that they could have some data points that may be pretty useful to the group. And I know for the public defenders and for some of the health organizations, talking about releasing information seems completely taboo. So we want to make sure that we're being aware of restrictions for confidentiality and HIPAA laws and stuff like that. So Johnny's, what do you got for us?
Is there maybe something, thinking the pretrial services, I don't remember the name of that software, but John Kraus. Is it CE pretrial? I don't know, one of the items it sounded like you were looking for pretrial supervision and things like that, if they were effective.
Yeah, no, that absolutely. So I don't know the name of the software, but you're right. John Kraus may have some information there. And I was thinking also of the the service provided through district corporation. So district corporation not on the list. So
Caseload Pro.
Caseload Pro.
so, and it's not on our list here, but it's potential that we could have, you know, some inroads there that would make a difference in the long run here. Okay. Jill, go ahead.
Thank you. One of the things that would be helpful to me in updating this list for you, the first, the big 3 columns on the left-hand side of the page, if we could maybe condense those into 1 column, 1 list, that would give more room to add these other jurisdictions and these other systems into the matrix. So not right now necessarily, but maybe hopefully for me, you guys can give some thought into condensing these lists a little bit, how you want to do that.
Yeah, I think part of the issue was when I first got the list, I started adding fields that didn't necessarily exist on the original list. And rather than just adding a row, I added them in a column. So that's probably on me.
It's actually not, Caleb. If you look at the top, you'll see the first column are the data points that were recommended from, what was his name? James Austin, I think.
Okay.
Column B were data points recommended from Vera, and then column C were data points that the task force recommended. So I do remember, Caleb, what you were talking about when you originally filled this out, but this was something different. I'm hoping to condense these 3 lists from these 3 different groups.
Okay. So I love it. I like not being responsible for that issue as well. So I think maybe we'll take a stab at condensing by reducing the redundancy. So if there's an exact name column that's exactly the same across all 3 columns, that we just condense, or we add a row if it's something that's different or unique. And that might be an approach that could work. I will volunteer to take a stab at that. And then, you know, as long as I'm not the only one making that decision, I think I'm okay with that. Does anybody else have any feedback on this list or things concerning the list? I don't see anybody with their hands raised. And again, we're all professional meeting goers, so we're all pretty excited about moving on to the next thing. So the last thing on the list for the agenda is other business. Does anybody have anything for the good of the order, for the benefit of the team? Hearing none, we will move to public comment. Am I wrong, Jill? I don't see anybody attending.
There are no attendees today.
Excellent. You know what that means? We're officially adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Caleb.
See ya.